Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be taking a look at the Equal Pay Act.
Oh, yeah.
We've got some really cool source material for this one.
Okay.
Some excerpts from a policy analysis paper, and we're going to kind of trace its impact on business and society.
Sounds good. Yeah. I mean, the Equal Pay Act, it's pretty fascinating how it wasn't just like a standalone policy.
Yeah.
Like it really kind of came out of a particular historical moment, you know?
I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
The source material we've got actually takes us all the way back to World War II,
Okay.
a time when lots and lots of women, entered the workforce.
Right.
And they were filling all these roles that were traditionally held by men, right?
Exactly. And Claudia Golden, she actually, her research found a tenfold increase in married women who were, engaged in paid work between 1890 and 1990.
Wow.
So, huge transformation.
Yeah.
But even with that, huge increase, there was still this jarring pay gap.
Right.
Women in the 1960s, they were earning something like 60% of what men were making for the same work. So
It's crazy.
yeah, it was a real, call to action moment.
It's like the system itself was just not valuing women's contributions.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, and that kind of brings us to this idea of the Equal Pay Act as a market solution,
Okay.
because, the paper really argues that this gap wasn't just, unfair. It was like a sign of a market failure.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically, an information asymmetry problem.
Okay.
So Jeffrey A. Mello, he kind of explains this as like, there's just this lack of transparency
Yeah.
and clear metrics for valuing women's work. It's like the market was operating with these blinders on,
Huh.
not really recognizing, the true value of what women were bringing to the table.
So how did this information asymmetry actually play out in the real world for women?
Well, think about it. Like when a huge part of the population isn't getting paid fairly,
Yeah.
they face all sorts of financial struggles, right? Less economic power, more vulnerable to poverty. It creates this, downward spiral that keeps women stuck in this, disadvantaged position.
Yeah.
Legal momentum actually has some pretty stark statistics,
Whoa.
Women are 35% more likely to be poor than men.
Wow.
And that's, that speaks volumes about the systemic inequalities that were in place before the Equal Pay Act even came about.
So it sounds like the Equal Pay Act was, a real attempt to
Yeah.
correct this market failure,
Exactly.
to make the system actually see the value
Yeah.
of women's work.
Yeah, to force it to recognize it, right?
Yeah.
It was like, this necessary intervention, a way to actually level the playing field.
Right.
So by establishing a federal standard for fair pay,
Yeah.
it kind of created this safety net for women
Right.
and pushed back against decades of discrimination.
This is like a pivotal moment then for women in the workforce.
Huge, yeah.
But I want to get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Like, how did this actually become a law?
Well,
Who makes sure people follow it?
so it all started in 1963.
Okay.
President Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act into law.
Huge.
It was a big deal, and it basically, said employers can't discriminate based on sex when they're deciding wages.
But the research we have does mention there are some, exceptions, right?
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. There are these 4 specific factors that can justify, wage differences.
Okay.
So like merit, seniority, incentive systems, and then factors other than sex.
Gotcha.
So, like somebody might choose to work like a less desirable shift or something, which
Yep.
could, be a reason for a difference in pay. But
Yep.
the main idea is clear, paying a woman less simply because she's a woman,
Yeah.
that's strictly prohibited.
So it sounds like this has some real teeth then.
Absolutely.
So who's actually in charge of making sure everyone follows these rules?
So that would be the EEOC,
Okay.
the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Okay.
They're like the watchdogs,
Gotcha.
They make sure employers are playing by the rules of the Equal Pay Act.
So let's say an employee thinks their employer's breaking the rules.
Right.
What can they do?
So they can file a complaint with the EEOC,
Okay.
and that kind of sets off this process.
Okay.
That can go a few different ways.
Okay.
So the EEOC has all these tools they can use,
Hmm.
mediation, arbitration litigation.
Hmm.
Mediation is like the most common one.
Really?
Yeah. So the EEOC, they kind of act as this, neutral party,
Right.
and they try to help the employer and the employee come to some kind of an agreement.
So they try to resolve it amicably first?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's actually really effective.
Oh, wow.
Research suggests that mediation is used to resolve the vast majority of EEOC cases,
That's great.
something like 60 to 80%.
Oh, wow.
So if mediation doesn't work, then they can go to arbitration, which is a bit more formal,
Okay.
or even litigation, which is, taking the case to court.
So the EEOC's got their hands full then enforcing not just the Equal Pay Act, but all sorts of, workplace discrimination rules.
Totally.
Yeah, it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah. Wow.
But I think for now, let's stick with the Equal Pay Act.
Okay.
And kind of shift gears a bit to explore how it's really changed the landscape for women,
Yeah.
In business and society.
That's a great segue. I think this is a good place to take a quick pause before we jump into that next phase of the Equal Pay Act's impact.
Sounds good. It's amazing to think about the ripple effects of the Equal Pay Act, like on business and society.
Totally.
It's like this dam broke.
Yeah.
And women were suddenly empowered to say, hey,
Right.
I deserve more.
Exactly.
This isn't right.
And they could actually challenge those discriminatory practices.
Exactly. And we've seen, like a huge surge in female-owned businesses and women stepping into leadership roles, since the act was passed.
Right.
Like, for instance, in 2020,
Right.
there were 37 Fortune 500 companies
Wow.
that were led by women CEOs. I mean,
That's incredible.
back in the 60s, that would have been unheard of.
That's a huge change.
Huge, yeah.
And it's not even just about the numbers.
Right.
Like the research suggests that female entrepreneurs actually bring this whole new perspective to the table.
Totally.
They're not just driven by profit.
Right.
It's more about purpose.
Purposed.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
It is Felon Fatemi. She's a venture capitalist.
Okay.
And she wrote this article for Forbes.
Okay.
And she pointed out the study
Right.
that found only like 2% of female entrepreneurs
Wow.
are primarily motivated by like financial gain
Okay.
compared to 15% of men.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Yeah, it's like women are just more inclined to start these businesses that are about making a positive impact on the world.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like it really aligns with that whole purpose-driven business trend that we're seeing.
Absolutely.
You
And research from Harvard Business Review even suggests that those businesses tend to be more sustainable and successful in the long run.
Really?
They're not just chasing profits.
Right.
They're trying to solve problems, make a difference.
I like that.
Yeah.
The analysis paper actually uses Sarah Blakely as like a prime example
Oh, yeah. She's a great one.
of this, purpose-driven, female-led business.
Totally.
I think her story is so inspiring.
It is. I mean, she built this billion-dollar company focusing on a product that like literally empowers women,
Totally.
shapewear that helps them feel confident and comfortable.
Yeah.
But what's even more inspiring is how she's using her success to help other women
Right.
through the Sarah Blakely Foundation.
Yeah.
She's invested millions in supporting female-run small businesses.
Like this chain reaction of empowerment. you know?
It's amazing.
The Equal Pay Act kind of set the stage.
Yeah.
And now we see all these women not only succeeding in business,
Right.
but also giving back and making the world a more equitable place.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful cycle.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings us to this question of the philosophical underpinnings of equality itself.
Ooh, okay. This is where it gets really interesting for me.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So, the paper dives into this idea that
Yeah.
economic inequality isn't just like a practical problem. It's also like a philosophical debate, with all these implications
Yeah.
and different schools of thought.
Okay.
They have really different perspectives on what a just society even means.
Okay.
Like, for example, libertarians, they might say,
Yeah.
any outcome in a free market is fair,
Oh.
even if it leads to like huge disparities in wealth.
So from their perspective, the pay gap wouldn't necessarily be a problem.
Exactly. Yeah. They're all about individual freedom,
Okay.
limited government intervention.
Gotcha.
Utilitarians, though,
Yeah.
they probably have a very different take on it.
Okay.
They're all about maximizing happiness and well-being
Right.
for everyone, and that often means
Yeah.
redistributing resources to even things out a bit.
So they'd probably be more in favor of policies like the Equal Pay Act then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Things that aim to level the playing field.
Makes sense.
And then there's John Rawls.
Okay.
He's a political philosopher,
Okay.
and he came up with this idea called the difference principle.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit complicated for me though.
It is. It's nuanced.
Yeah.
But basically what he's saying is
Okay.
it's okay for there to be some inequality
Okay.
if it's based on things like talent and effort.
Okay.
But everyone should start from the same place. Like,
Right.
think about a race, everyone lines up at the same starting line.
Right.
That's what the Equal Pay Act is trying to do.
Okay.
Make sure no one's held back just because of their gender.
That makes it a lot clearer.
Yeah.
So the Equal Pay Act is really reflecting this difference principle than
Exactly.
trying to make things fair at the beginning.
Yeah.
Not necessarily guarantee that everyone ends up with the same thing.
Yeah. Right? It recognizes that some people will naturally be more successful
Right.
and earn more,
Yeah.
but it's about removing those obstacles
Yeah.
that keep women from competing fairly.
Right.
It's about equality of opportunity,
Right.
not necessarily equality of outcome.
That's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
So looking back on all the years since it was passed,
Right.
how effective has the Equal Pay Act really been
Yeah.
at closing that gap?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
There's definitely been progress.
Okay.
Like, Business Insider has data that shows the gap has shrunk by over 20% since 1979.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's a big
It
achievement.
sounds like we're moving in the right direction.
We are.
But is it enough?
Right.
Like, is the work done?
Good question.
Has the Equal Pay Act reached its full potential?
Yeah.
Or are there still things holding us back
Mm.
from truly achieving equal pay? Makes you wonder if an Equal Pay Act was just like the first step in a
Yeah.
much longer journey.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a good point. I mean, it was a huge step, but it wasn't like a magic bullet or anything. It
Yeah.
laid the foundation, though, for
Yeah.
other laws that could
Mhm.
tackle those really complex issues
Right.
around pay discrimination,
Yeah, the research we have actually mentions the Civil Rights Act of 1964
Oh, yeah.
and the Paycheck Fairness Act as like examples of
That's
that.
actually, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of evolution. The Civil Rights Act came just a year after the Equal Pay Act,
Wow.
and it really broadened the scope of protection.
Okay.
Like, it outlawed discrimination based on sex
Oh.
in hiring, promotions, firing.
Wow.
Huge victory for women.
Huge. Yeah.
And then, decades later,
Yeah.
you have the Paycheck Fairness Act
Mhm.
introduced in 2019.
Okay.
And that was all about strengthening and clarifying the
Right.
Equal Pay Act, It's like, we're still working on this.
It's like building a house.
Yeah.
You start with the foundation
Right.
and then you just keep adding layers.
Right. Exactly. And it shows how important it is to keep pushing,
Yeah.
keep advocating.
Right.
The Equal Pay Act was huge,
Yeah.
but it's not the end of the story.
Right.
We need to stay vigilant,
Yeah.
adapt to new challenges.
Be willing to address them.
Exactly.
So looking ahead then,
Yeah.
what are some of those next steps
Mm.
in this fight for equal pay?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Some people think we need to enforce the laws we already have more strictly.
Okay.
We have the tools,
Uh-huh.
we just need to use them.
Right.
Others think we need to go deeper
Okay.
and address the root causes.
Like what?
Things like lack of affordable childcare,
Yeah.
paid family leave.
Those are huge.
Yeah, these are things that disproportionately affect women
Right.
and hold them back in their careers.
It's not a simple problem.
No, it's not.
So we need a bunch of different solutions.
Exactly.
I've also heard a lot about pay transparency lately.
Oh.
Like making companies be more open
Right.
about how much they pay people.
Transparency is key.
It is, yeah, it's like shining a light
Yeah.
on those hidden inequalities.
Exactly. And it forces everyone to talk about fairness.
Right.
And at the end of the day, closing the gender pay gap
Yeah.
isn't just about fairness.
It's about so much more.
It's about economic growth,
Yeah.
social progress.
When women are paid fairly, everyone benefits.
Everyone, yeah.
It's about unlocking the full potential of our entire workforce.
And building a better society.
It's not just a women's issue.
No.
It's a human issue.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been amazing talking about this with you today.
It has. It's been a pleasure.
The Equal Pay Act may not be perfect,
Right.
but it definitely started something.
It did. It sparked a movement.
And we can't forget
Yeah.
that the journey toward true equality,
Yeah.
it's a marathon,
It is.
not a sprint.
We have to keep pushing forward.
We do
Keep asking the tough questions.
and holding each other accountable
Absolutely.
for creating a world
Yeah.
where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Regardless of gender.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today
Of course.
for this deep dive into the Equal Pay Act.
Yeah.
We hope you found it insightful,
Absolutely.
and we hope it sparked some conversations.
Yeah. Let's keep talking about this.
Let's all work towards a future
Yeah.
where everyone has the opportunity to succeed.
No matter who they are.
Thanks again for listening.